I can only see that one question. I don't see the other three.
They were in different places.
Pam sent it to us at 10:43. Well, it would be 11:43 a.m. your time.
Well, I saw that, but I'm on Whova and it just has one of them. It doesn't show all of them.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so there were some community discussion boards that I think they got added to. Okay, let's get started. 201. So welcome to all the attendees. Hopefully you all are in the right place. This is the Tri-State GIS Manager GIO panel discussion. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Pam Bond. I am an Enterprise GIS Analyst Senior for the City of Boise and the moderator of this panel. With us today, we have Mike Woodford. He is the State of Idaho Chief Data Officer and Geospatial Information Officer, and he has only been with the state since this July. So he is definitely doing some awesome things in that time so far. He has over 25 years of experience in global enterprise IT, with 16 years in the C-suite executive team for various private and public companies in 26 countries. So you've definitely seen some places. We also have two representatives from Washington. Joanne Markert is the State of Washington GIS Coordinator. She is committed to creating a team environment that encourages collaboration among state, local, federal, and tribal partners, and enjoys learning new ways to apply GIS for the benefit of Washington State. Department of Ecology, she is the GIS manager there. She was also the WAVIC co-chair for 3 years, and prior to that, she wore various hats: steward, application developer, and spatial database admin. And finally, we have with us Cy Smith. He is the State of Oregon Geospatial Program Coordinator. He has led that program since June 2000. Prior to coming to Oregon, Cy was the State GIS Coordinator in Kansas, the City GIS Manager for the City of Olathe. Did I say that right?
Olathe.
Olathe, in the Kansas City area, and a GIS consultant for Plan Graphics Incorporated in Frankfurt. Okay, so with that, we will go ahead.
You forgot Wilma.
Hello, Pam.
Oh, hi, Wilma. I didn't know if you were going to be a casual bystander. So, hello, Wilma. She is the chair of the Idaho Geospatial Executive Committee, and she is also fairly new at the state office. Wilma, I don't know if I know your official title.
Oh, GIS analyst.
GIS analyst. Awesome. GIS analyst senior. Is that correct?
Yes, they call it 3 right now.
Yep. You gotta keep that part in there too. Okay. So we're going to get started here. We have a couple of questions that we have given out to the panelists to think on and prepare a little bit for, and then if we have some time at the end, I know we have some questions from some of our conference participants, and we'll get to those as time allows. So we're going to start off with Cy, and he's going to be talking about questions related to what is the working relationship like between your office at the state and local jurisdictions in your state? Is data shared freely? Any advice you can give? What strategies have worked to encourage people to share their ideas? And so I'll bring up your, so Eric, if you're on, I need to be able to decide if you want to get started. I will bring up your show.
Okay. Well, just for the attendees, Wilma created these lovely backgrounds for us. So very nice. We love these. Different ones for each of us. So I kind of shortened the question so I could get it onto a slide that Pam's going to maybe show here in a minute. I thought the kind of the thrust of the question was, how do you get state and local government to share data with each other? We have really always included all levels of government in our enterprise, our geospatial enterprise. Since probably, I think it was 94 that they changed the governor's executive order to include local governments more extensively, and tribes at that point, and federal agencies. So since then, at least, it's been that kind of an enterprise approach. And there we go. So go to the next one, the next slide. That's the one I'm talking on. There you go. So in 2015, our council went to the legislature to propose data sharing legislation. We had tried for, as I said here, for 15 years to get all the counties to share parcels and roads without full success. In fact, even today, we have 5 counties who won't share parcel data with anyone. Well, I shouldn't say that. They will share it under certain circumstances with certain entities, but you know, case-by-case basis. And then we have 5 different counties who won't share roads data in that same way. So we still haven't completely solved the problem, but we decided after 15 years of trying all kinds of different approaches, agreements, you know, goodwill, all sorts of things, that we just weren't going to get there without also having a mandate. So we went to the legislature. It was, a lot of it was about parcel data and roads data, because those 2 data sets are critically important for wildfire and public safety issues, but lots of other things as well, as you all know. Local governments in 2015 opposed the legislation, and the legislature sponsored an interim work group that was, you know, put to me and to somebody in the legislature, the committee administrator for the committee we had proposed the legislation to create legislation that everyone could agree to. So if you go to the next slide. I just have a couple more slides here. So in 2017, we worked on that with that stakeholder group for a year plus, a year and a half. We came up with legislation that everyone could agree to. We had, you know, cities, counties, private sector, regional government, tribal government, federal agencies, nonprofits, citizens, all in that stakeholder group. What the legislation did that we proposed in 2017 that was enacted was gave statutory authorization and restructured the council so that all the stakeholder groups pretty much had equitable representation at the table. And that was one of the things that everybody really wanted, and one of the things that was real, you know, a real success factor. It also mandates secure geospatial framework data sharing between all public bodies. So, you know, the difference there is, or the key point there is, that we're not putting all of the framework data. The framework is the foundational data, the underlying data like parcels and addresses and roads and things that all the other geospatial data can be integrated with if you have that framework. It's like the common key in database terms. We're not putting all that in the public domain. In order to get this legislation passed, and in order to get government agencies to share the data with each other, we had to say, we will have a secure place where all the public bodies can share this framework data with each other. Free of charge. There's a caveat that the local governments insisted on putting in there, and that was that the data will be shared as is unless there's additional funding provided by the state. So I've got one more slide on this question, I think. And that's a key, you know, that's why we're not done yet, because the legislature has not provided the funding. So, but as a result of that, of getting that statute enacted, the relationship between all the public bodies has really taken on the flavor of a partnership. The local government started talking about this as a partnership as soon as we got that stuff enacted. That's how they sold it to their peers, was we're building a partnership with all the other government bodies. And the local governments are the ones that we really needed to buy into this. So it was a really key thing to put that stakeholder group together and have the legislature and the governor's office be co-sponsors, the executive branch be co-sponsors of that. We requested initial funding for the partnership last year. We didn't get it for a whole variety of reasons that I don't need to go into here. It's interesting stuff, but we don't have time. And we're trying again in the next session. I think a combination of strategies is what really works. We really needed that mandate, but we also use use cases. We've done ROI studies, you know, all kinds of things that we did, agreements across the board. We will still have agreements in some cases. So that's my answer to the first question.
So Sai, how did you get those 5 counties on board?
Yet.
Oh, you haven't yet.
No, they are holding out, waiting to see if we get some funding. And that will, you know, there are 3 issues about this that local governments always bring to the table. Risk and liability is one issue. Privacy and confidentiality is another issue. And funding is the third issue. And within the legislation, we resolved the liability issue, we resolved the privacy confidentiality issue. We did not resolve yet the funding issue.
Great, thanks, Sai. Do any of the other panelists want to have any comments on how they're sharing data amongst their the different agencies in their states?
I can take a small.
Okay, then we will move on to question number 2.
We
Somebody
got
had
someone
something.
answering here.
Joanne, I think, had something. Or
Yeah.
somebody.
Wasn't sure if you could hear me okay.
Mhm.
Well, I would say that Washington takes a slightly different approach. We don't have a legislative mandate. So I think really when we look at this, we're really looking at a collaboration, and that, recognizing that the county government really has the authoritative data on so much of parcels and road centerways, 911 type of data, addresses. So really just trying to look at forming collaborations and partnerships. So I think ours is a little bit more grassroots than what I think Sai just described, just as a contrast.
And, and Idaho's pretty much the same way. We don't have any mandates, but certainly are working hard to develop good relationships with the counties. And some we already have fairly good relationships with. Others are going to be a little bit of a struggle. And I think time will tell, but certainly we've got a large portion of state data and quite a bit of county data that people are sharing already, but not as much as we'd like.
Right, yeah, and that's a hard thing for so many reasons. Every county, if you're talking about county specifically, kind of has their own say, and some counties may be so small that they don't even have the resources to provide some of the data that you're requesting or anything like that. So all sorts of different challenges there. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. So Joanne and Christina, what does the state do to engage GIS professionals from all levels of government and industry, and what has worked best in your state?
All right, well, I'll start off with that and then Joanne can chime in. So I was the Washington Geographic Information Council co-chair with Joanne for the last 3 years, and the Information Council has been part of our efforts for quite a long time before Joanne and I were here. So we hold GIS users workshops and meetings. We have a email that people can request to send information out to that list of GIS users in Washington State. We work with conferences, and a couple of years ago we presented at the NWGIS on our Washington State, our strategic plan for WAGIC. We also host a GIS Day event at the Capitol where we are able to get both government and industry involved in sharing the work that we're doing, and it's a great opportunity for people to exchange ideas and network locally. Also, as part of our LIDAR plan, the DNR holds LIDAR stakeholder group, which has been really effective too in bringing in industry and governments, what their business needs are for the state. And other things that we're thinking about is hosting a workshop to talk about NHD needs within Washington State and get stakeholder input to figure out and prioritize how best to manage NHD into the future. So those are some of the few ways that we engage with both government and industry. Joanne, do you have more to say to that?
I would just say that trying to get involved with as many meetings as possible, and actually, really appreciate this opportunity at the Northwest GIS conference here to meet folks and to be able to present. I would say the one thing that I miss, and the thing that I always am trying to listen for and look for at meetings and conferences, is just actually talking with people individually and understanding what their needs are and stuff like that. So I would just kind of say, as a little shout out, if you happen to be from Washington State and are participating in this forum, I sure would love to have an email from you because I think in the world of COVID, we got to find different ways to connect. And even though I think this is awesome and I so appreciate and respect how much work it is to put these things on, the one thing that I feel like I kind of miss a little bit is more of that personal connection. So I would certainly invite that. And I think that that's kind of what helps us manage through this. And that's what's going to help get us through these types of things. I do think, though, that it's also an opportunity because now that so many of these conferences are virtual, you know, I may not have been able to attend a Northwest GIS conference in Boise, but, you know, it's virtual, so I can be here. And so I think that kind of offers new opportunities. And so I guess what I'm looking forward to is hoping that there are some regional meetings, at least in Washington, that I can participate in as much as possible, help present, listen, hear what other concerns we have for Washington. So, yeah.
Yeah, gotcha. I agree. I feel like sometimes at a conference, I always learn too much going to the seminars and things, but sometimes those in between hallway conversations, you can make some cool connections with people to kind of help further each other's missions. Okay, does anybody else want to comment on that question?
I think here in Idaho, our geotech listserv is a pretty good way to keep everybody informed and know what's going on. I think Mike and I are in a unique position where we get to work with different state agencies here and kind of find out what they're doing and see what kind of overlaps or connections we can make there. And also our IGC-EC meeting, our Idaho Geospatial Council, has been fairly active recently. So let me put a plug in there for tomorrow when we have our IGC meeting, like right during the conference tomorrow afternoon, early afternoon.
I would expect no less from you, Wilma. Thanks for the plug. Okay, so let's go back to Cy here. So Cy, what kind of work are you doing as a with the GIS community to support COVID and vaccine distribution plannings? And let me know if you want that PDF back up.
I do want the PDF back up.
Okay.
So all of us, I think, are probably doing a lot of different things, a lot of really great work to support COVID planning. We are not currently in Oregon, as far as I know, the GIS community hasn't been involved yet in vaccine distribution planning. We've been working on response mostly, so I'll show you a dashboard just in a second that Oregon Emergency Management and Oregon Health Authority have been working on. They have shared responsibility for the response efforts. OEM, that's Emergency Management, has a number of public and secure ArcGIS Online sites that they've set up to track the virus, gather information. They also, by the way, have set up an ArcGIS Online hub for collecting wildfire data from a lot of different sources. So they've been managing both of these major issues in Oregon for us in terms of tracking everything. Our group, my group, and GIS folks from 6 other agencies helped the Oregon Health Authority develop a secure ArcGIS Online and Survey 123 initiative that's tracking the response readiness of a wide variety of facilities. We're using the FEMA Lifelines approach or Community Lifelines approach, which you guys can Google. Pretty cool thing. It kind of combines some of the previous efforts. In fact, the effort that Oregon Emergency Management and the public safety community uses right now, FEMA has kind of boiled that down into something called their Community Lifelines approach. So we're using that, and if you go to the next slide, I think that's the dashboard, them. Yeah. So this is just one screenshot of the dashboard that we had put together for them. I've pulled up one item, and it's over on the Idaho Oregon border in the Baker City area, I believe, or no, the Ontario area, sorry, the Snake River Correctional Institute. So you can click on these things, you can get the information about what's going on with regard to COVID, but the idea is to figure out whether facilities of all different kinds, correctional facilities, hospitals and clinics, ag facilities, ag processing facilities, whether they have what they need to be successful and to respond to the virus. So it's still a response effort, but it's just looking at different types of facilities. So there's a tab underneath the map there, and what we're looking at right now is called the Community Lifeline map. but there's other facilities down there. You can see ag housing is one of those. So when you click that, it brings up a different map, has a different set of facilities. You still see that down the bottom that there are 6 facilities around Oregon of all different kinds. This is the combination of the facilities that you're looking at here. 6 that are unstable, meaning they've got ongoing virus cases and they don't have everything that they need. There are 119 more that are stabilizing, and then 176 that have everything they need. They're stable. That information is gathered by survey, and the surveys get updated every week. So, so that was something that we helped build. If you go to the next slide. We're also working with the Chief Data Officer and I, Catherine Helms, have been working with Portland Metro on an initiative to prepare for economic recovery. There really are, I realize that there's a lot that needs to be done for economic recovery, but we get pushback when we're starting to try to work on economic recovery because people feel like that's taking resources away potentially from the response. But you know, our feeling is, look, we've got to be ready for this. I mean, we're going to pivot from response to recovery, and it's going to happen, you know, very, very quickly. And we're probably going to go back and forth for a while. We are right now going back and forth between response and recovery, and they're kind of 2 ends of the continuum. And we have to be able to support what needs to happen on the economic recovery side. So that effort started with a needs assessment by a whole wide variety of stakeholders. Greater Portland Inc. is kind of the Chamber of Commerce kind of folks. Community-based organizations, that's the folks, the community, let's see, how do I say this? That's the organizations of color. You know, they have a real racial equity lens in Portland that they want to apply to the economic recovery. So they've got those folks participating. And then a lot of county and city leaders and GIS professionals. Let's go to the next one. And what we're going to do with that needs assessment is we're going to develop a set of integrated tools, I believe, that will respond to the needs assessment. We're probably going to take advantage of existing tools that the OEM and OHA tools that I showed you, tracking the virus, response readiness, that kind of thing. Particularly that community lifelines approach is going to be really critical for this. Metro has what's called a regional barometer data hub, and I've got a slide of that just to put that up on the screen here in just a second. And you can Google that, Portland Metro Regional Barometer, and you can really dig into the data there. But there's a lot of socioeconomic data that is pulled together about the whole metro area within that hub. And then Business Oregon, which is the state business development department, has been tracking CARES Act funding coming into the state. They haven't been tracking everything, so we'll have to expand on that, but that's one of the things that we would have available within this kind of integrated tool kit. And we're going to bring ESRI in, and I'm going to spend some credits from our enterprise agreement with ESRI to have them help us put these things together and bring in some perspective from other states and around the country on what other folks are doing, so that we're not missing out on this and not just building something that doesn't take advantage of that. And then we'll use that as a model for statewide implementation. So go to the next slide. And this doesn't really show anything, but it just is the Portland Metro Regional Barometer, and it tells you there what it does. It provides metrics on racial equity, communities, climate, environment. That's a thing that a lot of people aren't looking at, but there's a great opportunity in the economic recovery from COVID to take advantage of the federal dollars and other things, and really improve our environment as well. So and then transportation, lots of different socioeconomic data within that hub. So that's kind of what we're doing.
Great, thanks, Cy. That's awesome. Washington or Idaho want to comment on COVID related
not after listening to Cy. I mean, we are nowhere near what Oregon is doing.
No, I doubt that.
One thing that we're doing in Washington is we're doing broadband equity, because broadband distribution, particularly to some of our more rural areas, or actually it can be urban but still not have consistent Wi-Fi. We've got a broadband, and we have all of our students and people with telemedicine needs and work from home. And so that's been a really large effort for Washington State, is looking at that. And I am organized within the IT department, which has a fairly large workload or in, decision-making capability for where these things should be and how do you maintain them, and what facilities might be available. All of that has to do with where. And so GIS has really become a prominent player in that world as well. And that's been really fun.
I looked at the document that you had put together, Joanne, about just kind of a summary. I was just looking at that last night. I found that in one email that you had sent out. A lot of different things that are going on there. You've even participated. I think you were detailed to your ECC or your EOC at some point during this, right?
Yeah, spent a couple of weeks there to try to help get things ushered through and pointing in the right direction. And it was pretty complicated. I think we all kind of dealt with how complicated things were at first, and where's the information coming from. And we've got HIPAA data from Department of Health, and just trying to figure out what is needed where. And so there was a lot going on, but really a lot of folks that you could reach back to. I mean, what I was really impressed with probably most of all is that while I was working in the SEOC, and even since I've been back to my regular job, is just being able to call on different agencies and asking them for help for perhaps that one data layer. Because the thing that I noticed is that we needed data from like everything. Like it wasn't just wildfire or floods or those things that we're somewhat more used to responding to. But I mean, we needed, like what you're saying, Cy, with, economic recovery type of data. And maybe we need to know where the nursing homes are, and maybe we need to know where broadband is. We need to know where the food banks are. I mean, it touched every single agency, I think, in the state. And I was just really impressed with how well all of our agencies responded. And they weren't part of the SEOC, but they were helping to provide the data that was used for those decisions and to help us with our response in Washington. So really a shout out to them and a thank you to them as well.
It goes back to the data sharing issue too. I mean, in the sense that this data, what I've been struck by, and I get struck by this in every disaster, is all these people running around looking for data and they can't find it. The people who absolutely have to have the data, it should have already been in their hands. It should have already been integrated and standardized and normalized and everything that needs to happen so that they can just use it. And instead, in the middle of a disaster, they're all running around, 15 people coming to me, saying, hey, have you seen any of this? Do you know where I could find this or that? And I'm like, oh my God, here we are again. I mean, we've got to put an end to that. And we need to use this. There's never been a disaster of this magnitude. We've got to use this to fix that problem. Sorry, I had to get on my soapbox. We slide my soapbox under my desk now for a second.
Yeah, and it's not that we don't have the tools to do it. That's the thing. Like, we all have the tools to make that data readily accessible. It's just a matter of the different hurdles we have to overcome to make that kind of stuff happen. And it's not always the most glamorous thing to do, dealing with that kind of stuff. So it may not be always the focus. We all have our day-to-day that we're dealing with, and the people that are throwing things at us from all different directions. So like, yes, standardizing and making data readily available might not rise to the top all the time, but you're absolutely correct. Like, the COVID stuff is just another great example of people scattering about trying to pull stuff in and make sense of it all, was really impeded by just that lack of accessible data.
And wildfire right in the middle of that.
Right. Well, and I'd say communication.
Sure.
I mean, we have quite a bit of Washington. It wasn't everything we needed, I can admit to that for sure, but just the communication of it, so that the people who did come into the activation, we had a lot of people responding to it. And frankly, they just weren't as familiar with it. So I think we have to kind of socialize that, hey, we already have this. We already have this. We have a method for that. Oh, you need schools? I need to talk to OSPI. I need, oh, you need this? I need to talk to the right authoritative source. And so I think just kind of getting that to be more of how people are thinking and responding and thinking about our data as a state is really important as well.
Yeah.
And I think
some may
going
not
back,
always even think. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
sorry, going back to what Cy mentioned, I think what I took from his statement was we need to move away from this reactive mode and be proactive. We know what's coming down the road. We have a sense of what the needs are regarding the data that will be needed to be successful in that. And yet we will be reactive. And I'm not talking about we individually, but we as organizations will be reactive and wait till the crisis happens before we start getting the 15 people running around asking Cy, hey, where's the data? Right?
Yeah. So the really important part of that is what Joanne mentioned, though, and that is that it's one thing to bring the data together, get it all ready to go and everything else, and that's a key part of it. But having all the right people know that this is where you go for the authoritative data when there's a disaster, because you're still going to have, if you don't do it right, you'll have all the data and only 2 people will know where it is, and the other 13 are still running around with their heads cut off trying to figure it out. So all of that stuff, all that communication stuff is critically important.
Well, and I like the term that Joanne used of socializing that, because
Yeah.
the more that we do, then the word will spread. And it's just a natural process, right? Because you might have a minor crisis that you're involved in, and because of that, you need to get into that data, and you go, oh, well, I've got this data, and let me tell my friend about it. So just starting that socialization process is a huge step in the right direction, I think.
Yeah, and I would say that Washington has really, I mean, through all of this, we've made this effort. We have our open data portal site, but we are making an effort to have our, what we call our GeoPortal 2, where we are setting up a place in which state agencies can share authoritative data back and forth instead of the old way of asking an agency and downloading it and then being like, oh, geez, this isn't the most up-to-date data set. And so I really feel like that's going to play a huge part in being able to start to be able to be more proactive than reactive on how we acquire data and have a platform in which we can then bring in some of those other data sets that aren't necessarily being shared, but have a platform to be able to do that and have an established process in place that we're mostly familiar with. So looking forward to that.
And also put some controls on if that data is in front of the firewall or behind the firewall.
Yes.
Right. So you can have some control on that.
Yep.
And in Idaho, WEM was really leading the charge on that whole portal thing on our side. And WEM, if you want to talk about it, go ahead.
Oh, we're still in our infancy too. We don't have a portal set up yet. Hopefully in the next couple of months. We'll get a portal, and I'll be looking to Washington and Oregon probably for ideas on how to best set that up. So I am hoping that the silver lining of this COVID thing is that more people realize how important their data is and are maybe a little bit less reluctant to just to share it. So we can be prepared to next time.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. So switching gears a little bit, another very specific topic. So Mike, where is Idaho in terms of the NG 911 planning and implementation? Okay,
so let me give a little bit of context to this. Pam mentioned at the beginning that I've been here for about 3 months. And shortly after coming to the state, and I had the opportunity to have a meeting with the state 911 coordinator who works at the Office of Emergency Management, and also with one of the county emergency people who happens to also be a very strong GIS person as well. And so we had this long conversation about what is NG 911, what are the pieces that are really critical for them to happen, for that to happen in the state. And it became very clear that the GIS component of Next Generation 911 is absolutely critical. And because everything is now location-based instead of just these tables, think the old days, everybody had a landline to your house, and that landline, when the phone company put it in, they associated an address with it. So if a call came from that particular number, they knew where to go. They just look it up on a table. Well, now, I mean, I don't have a landline in my house. I don't know many people who still do. We use mobile devices. And so the NG 911 program is built to use location data from mobile devices. But you can't use that unless you have accurate and adequate maps, road center lines, addresses associated with those, and so on. So one of the questions that we had with our discussions was, wow, this is really big. And so what can we do? And as we talked through the various things that needed to happen, literally out of the blue, the 911 coordinator came back to us and said, hey, there might be some money available to fund some of this from CARES money. So Wilma and I, along with our friend and partner up in Nez County, put together a proposal, and we have presented that to the Funding Council for the I'm drawing a blank, Office of Emergency Management, and basically got a thumbs up that they are behind it. So we're in the process of getting critical funding to do two things. First of all, we have to upgrade the infrastructure for our GIS systems so that we can receive the data from the counties and other sources, standardize it against the NINA standards, which is the ones that are in place for NG911, and then make that available to all of the counties as they start to bring NG911 online. Our stance is, and will continue to be, that when a county is ready to go forward with NG911, we do not want the GIS component to be the roadblock. And we want to be ready. The counties have a lot of work to do. I think it was Joanne who mentioned broadband. Right? There's a lot of small towns and cities out there who don't have good broadband. And NG911 requires a good broadband infrastructure. And so as they're working through the pieces for their infrastructure and radios and call centers and so on, we're going to be working on the GIS portion behind, so that when they say, hey, we're ready, we can go, okay, here's your data. And we would never be that roadblock. We're trying to not be in that reactive mode and to be very proactive. So that's why we're trying to start really early and have all of that in place, ready to go, continually updated, so that when the county's ready to turn their key, flip it on, we turn our key and just the data goes. So that's where we're at right now. Right now, there are no counties in the state that are fully NG911 ready. There's one in eastern Idaho that's very close, but none of them are complete. One of the things we're also doing is talking with other GIOs around the nation. There are several states who have good experience in this. And so we're having conversations with them about what were the lessons learned? How did you approach different problems? And learning from them so that we don't have to kind of muddle through and make those same mistakes. So that's kind of how we're doing it. Wilma, you got anything to add to that?
No, we just have our fingers crossed that we get the funding, because that sort of ties into what we were talking about earlier, just having a secure infrastructure at the state to have secure sharing and done through a portal. So we're hoping that with that funding, we can really beef that up here on our side. So hopefully good things to come, but I know we still have quite a long road to go.
I think Washington and Oregon are fairly well along the road. Is that right? Did I understand that correctly?
I think if we finally start talking about potatoes, we'll be number one, Mike.
Well, Oregon is not far along at all. In fact, all we've done is move from an analog to a digital system with our equipment, but the GIS data we've not even begun on yet. So, I mean, we're making progress in the sense that we have built statewide a number of the data sets that are absolutely essential, that are mandatory for NG911. Address points is the one that we're really working hard to improve on. We have a statewide address point data set, but there are a number of counties where it's not in great shape. So, for example, it was built from parcel centroids in one of our rural counties, Klamath County in the south central Oregon. So, and that's not what you want, obviously, but it's points, it's something. But it's not. You're not going to get to the right place necessarily, or as close as you need to be. So, so we've got a lot of work to do on that aspect in Oregon.
Yeah, Washington is doing, I think, pretty well. There's always things to do. We've got to figure out updates. Some of our counties are a little further along than others, but we've got address points, we've got street center lines. So we're in a pretty good spot, but there's more to go. And then also trying to figure out how to integrate that information. What kind of techniques can we use to share that information with other parts of the state? And I think that's really hard. And there's a lot of issues surrounding sharing 911 data to various levels. So to kind of flip back to one of our previous questions, just, how can we get that information and share it? And for Washington, that's really something very important to us. But it's just that there's a lot of folks involved and there's sensitivity about the data. And so all of that I completely understand, but there's things that we can do actually regarding broadband access, regarding elections, regarding actually contact tracing and things like that we can really use the data for. So I think, really trying to examine what are some of the roadblocks for that and how can we share it, among other things. 911 is hugely important, but there are other ways we could use that same data. So I think that's kind of where you get that return on investment, is many times you can use it. But there's a lot of pieces to that for sure. And so anyway, so I think for us, we are in good shape. We've got more to go, in good shape though, but also then how do we then take that, how do we take that and expand it out further, and how can we do more with what we have?
Yeah, for those of us who aren't super familiar with all the ins and outs of the NG 911 program, Mike, could you speak to just briefly what the kind of envisioned timeline of that is?
So for Idaho, in our conversations that we've had with the 911 coordinator, his statement was that best case, probably 18-ish months. More realistically is in the 3 to 4 year range. And that's to get all the counties, right? We've got 44 counties. So, if you count that number of months in 4 years, you got maybe one a month, right?
Yeah. So is it an
quite.
all or nothing system, like the whole state needs to be on, or can you go by county?
Yeah, you can go by county.
Okay.
Hugely exciting though. Sat in on a discussion a couple weeks ago about the use of 3D in NG 911, and they're looking at getting height above ground as part of that geospatial component. So that if someone goes to a high rise, they know pretty much how high they need to go, and take out some of the discrepancies of arriving at a building, trying to find out where they're supposed to go, especially if seconds are critical, to help first responders respond faster and be more effective in that response.
Yeah, interesting.
So one of the asks that we have for the CARES Act funding is the Hub Premium, which allows you to build initiatives. And I'm just kind of curious, Washington, Oregon, have you guys started using that just to mobilize people, if there's a targeted emergency, to build an initiative around it with the Hub Premium? I think it has a lot of possibilities.
We're using, we've just started using Hub Premium. We put it in our most recent enterprise agreement, and we just signed a 4-year agreement last week, 2 weeks ago maybe. Mm-hmm. And we've got 2 instances of Hub Premium in that agreement. One that we're going to use specifically for that secure sharing of geospatial framework data between all public bodies. So we'll use that, and instead of having, instead of opening that data to the full community, we'll have a narrow version of a community. Just anybody who works in a public body. We'll end up having 10,000 people in that community because it's anybody who works in a government body who wants to either upload or download the data. So that will end up being a lot of people over time. But and then we have another version that all the agencies will be able to use to create their own communities of service for whatever they want. So Daniel Staub in Oregon Emergency Management is already beginning to use that to create communities around wildfire, communities around around COVID. He'll have other types of communities like that, and other agencies will have similar kinds of communities for their own, purposes, whether it's water conservation or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm. That sounds pretty exciting. I'm curious to see what kind of initiatives can be sprung up around the COVID vaccine distribution. That should be really helpful there too. Okay.
Great. Thanks. All right, so let's move on here. So next question is, what is currently taking up most of your time as the GIS leader in your state? And Mike, we'll start with you.
Well, being the new guy, I'm spending a lot of time listening. And one of the things that I'm doing right now and started within the first couple weeks was really two things, is getting to know the GIS people in the various agencies, and also those that are participating in the IGC, IGCEC, and that, Pam, you're there, so this goes to counties and to cities as well. I'm having specific meetings with the agency GIS people to understand what it is they do, what drives their initiatives, and over the course of meeting with everybody, trying to find out where the deficiencies are in what they do and what they would like to do. One of the mandates we have as the central GIS for the state is to see what resources we can identify and put into place to help address the deficiencies and the common deficiencies, if you will, in the state agencies. And the interesting thing is I'm meeting with the leaders and the people who are literally doing it day to day as part of their job. Is there's such a broad range of skill sets and use cases that are just, one, hugely interesting to me, but also as I meet with some of these groups who really have very few people, but could do so much more if they had more time, more staff, more licenses, whatever that is. Training. They could just absolutely be stellar. And there's so many. I literally carry a book around on my computer. I keep a list of potential projects, and we met last week with one of the organizations. There's 2 people. They get around to it when they can. That's it. But what they do is so geospatially critical that my idea list just kind of blew up. So the mantra that we've taken here is 3 words: listen, understand, and then act. So we're very heavily, and I'm very heavily in the listen and understand portion right now. And getting all sorts of exciting things going on with getting the framework working groups reinvigorated and getting some new leadership. Looking at NG 911, that was fun and exciting, and we're, like Wilma said, keeping our fingers crossed. And there'll be a huge amount of work once that happens. But also being forward thinking, and like Cy said, is let's figure out ways that we can be ready before the crisis happens, and working to develop good relationships. And I think Joanne said this, that a lot of it is about developing good relationships with people and working hand in hand, common goals, and build goodwill that way. Also trust. And I think a lot of trust goes a long, long way. And and I'm just enjoying meeting people and hearing what they do, and then letting my imagination kind of run wild. So that's what's taking up all my time right now.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, and I'll say as a former state GISer, I do appreciate what you're doing and taking the time to sit down and talk to people and understand where their hurdles are and what their successes are. Oregon or Washington, do either of you want to comment on what's taking up a lot of your time right now? A lot of virtual meetings.
Yeah, a lot of virtual meetings, which actually I do like. I'm teasing. But if you look at the
Creating new
calendar-
backgrounds for team meetings.
Yeah.
No,
It's
but
fun.
I mean, I mentioned it earlier, and you know, a lot of it right now is about helping people find data. A lot of the data that people need for wildfire, in particular, right now is imagery data, and a huge demand for fresh imagery of burned areas. And there's a lot of imagery being flown, you know, and there's not a lot of coordination around it. It's exceedingly difficult when you add in a whole bunch of private sector vendors that are out there flying imagery, some on speculation, and others that are working with the National Insurance Crime Bureau, National Insurance Crime Bureau, that's what it is, NICB. We're working with them, you know, and they're working with our emergency management folks. But then you've got a bunch of other vendors out there, and you got a whole lot of state agencies and local governments who need that data. And so a lot of my time has been spent, particularly around imagery, but just around finding other data sources that people need that we know are out there, but you know, tough to track them down sometimes.
Yeah, so how does it work? I'm just curious, and I don't know it's even appropriate to ask, but let's say you find a private entity that has flown and you approach them. I mean, do they just sometimes give it over willingly, or do they usually make you pay for it, or have some sort of a, you know, use agreement type deal?
Most of them are, in my experience, most of them are flying it for somebody who has requested it, either through NICB, through Oregon Emergency Management, through FEMA, through the Bureau of Land Management, somebody else. And they just weren't aware that it wasn't getting out to everybody who needed it. And so typically they will, you know, allow us to take it and put it where it needs to be so that everybody can get access to it. That's not always the case. There are a few out there who, as I said, are flying the imagery speculatively with the idea that they know it's going to be valuable. It may not be valuable right now, but it may be valuable, you know, in a month or two. And so they want to hold on to it. And, you know, I mean, that's America.
Yep.
I'm not
Yep.
trying to get around that. So.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So let's see. I think we might have time for one more quick question here. So Joanne and Christina, what is something that you wish would work better in your state, or something you're kind of struggle with?
Well, I really liked what Mike just said. I really like to listen and understand about what's going on in our state and then find patterns. You know, I am a GIS analyst at heart, even though now I'm the state GIS coordinator. And so what I'm always interested in listening and finding out about are the patterns of problems. What do we all kind of share in terms of these challenges, and listening to them. And I would say that one of the things, and I mentioned earlier, is just that this virtual environment kind of impedes that a little bit. So I think it kind of challenges me personally, and I think it challenges our state to figure out how do we get that input back in? How do we help respond to our professionals who are working remotely now, a lot of them, and you know, GIS has large data files like imagery, for example. And so how do you help make sure that they're still able to keep doing their job? And while I can't really control all of those things, just trying to learn more about that and how to support them in this new environment is certainly a challenge. And then I think the other one is that we kind of have more of a push system in Washington. So I have got an email list. People can submit stuff to me, and then I'll, you know, if it seems like it'd be good for everybody, I'll send it back out for meetings or something like that, or the GIS day events and stuff. But what I don't really have a great method of is how to collect that feedback. And so I typically collect that during these types of conferences or something like that. But it seems like maybe now's the time to automate and innovate a little bit more and try to figure out, well, how can we change that? How can we make sure we're receiving that feedback? I want to be working on things that are not only important to the state agencies, but important to our state as a whole and strategic, and that affect all of our state, not just sort of one segment or one region of it. And so I would just say making sure that we've got that set up in a way that makes sense. And I think there's some room for improvement in Washington around that.
Sure.
Christina, did you have anything else to add?
I'd say that you mostly covered it. I think that, well, first of all, I think Joanne does a wonderful job of getting information from stakeholders around the whole entire state and GIS users. I really appreciate the work that she does.
Thank you.
And I think that, as she had said about that, the push system, trying to figure out a way, how do we really kind of get to what are those common needs amongst government, local government, industry that should be focused on for the state. So trying to figure out, especially now that we're in COVID and we're working remotely and we don't get to have those side conversations, how do you create a platform that people are wanting to utilize, but not overlap too much? I mean, one of the challenges you have too is, we have Northwest GIS users, we have YURISA, we have these platforms, but so then how could we utilize those platforms to try to get an idea of what are those common needs that we should be working towards.
Mm-hmm.
So I can speak up. One of the things that I wish would work better in Idaho. I think, Mike's right when he says Idaho is underutilized. So I wish that the state invested more in GIS professionals, because I think they would totally be worth their weight in gold if they could go in and actually made a lot of those tools work. I mean, we have the tools, but we're not using them because we don't have the skills and the people in the right spots to really use them. So,
I love that, Wilma. I think that's exactly right. I heard Adam Carnell use a description of the pocket knife, and that GIS is this big, huge pocket knife with all these tools, and we're just using the toothpick.
Mm-hmm, yeah, pretty much.
So
yes.
I always kind of like that analogy. I think that kind of resonates.
Yeah, a lot of opportunity with the GIS folks for sure. And I know everybody is really busy. And then one of the things that I've noticed is like the GIS community, and I don't know what it's like in Washington, Oregon, I'm assuming it's very similar. We like to talk to each other and bounce ideas off of each other. So I do love the community aspect of our group of professionals. They really do. They like to get together and have a good time and learn from each other. And I do appreciate that for sure. So we're really bumping up against the end of our hour here. I just want to take this last minute to say thank you so much to all of our panelists for all of your input. To those who did submit questions, from the participants, I apologize that we did not have time to answer those questions for you, but I will be sure to direct the panelists to those discussions if they wanted to add their input. So again, thank you all for coming, for participating, and for being panelists, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, Pam.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.